The quiet returned slowly. Not all at once, not like a switch flipped back into place, but the way a forest settles after a storm, branch by branch, sound by sound, until you realize the danger has passed not because it was defeated, but because it chose to wait. Life resumed its rhythms. Elias repaired what broke, maintained what endured, adjusted to the subtle limitations imposed by distant systems that no longer pretended neutrality. The land provided, the machines held. The quiet, though thinner now, remained theirs. Asarai changed too, not dramatically, not visibly to an outsider, but Elias noticed the difference in how she moved through the house, less careful, more deliberate. How she stood at the edge of the clearing some mornings, eyes lifted to the sky without flinching. How she spoke more often, not because she needed to be heard, but because she no longer feared the weight of her own voice. One evening, as the last light faded and the perimeter field hummed softly around them, Elias found her standing by the boundary line. "They will come again," she said, not turning as he approached. "When?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not soon, not unprepared." He joined her, hands in his pockets, staring out at the darkening forest. "Let me guess. They'll ask you to return, offer concessions." "Yes, and if you say no." Her gaze shifted to him then, steady, certain. "Then they will stop asking." Elias exhaled slowly. "That sounds final." "It is," she agreed. "For the sovereign I was." A pause. "For the person I am now," she continued, "it is only a beginning." He nodded, accepting that distinction without needing it explained. "You know," he said after a moment, "I never planned to matter to anyone beyond a repair manifest." Asarai's lips curved faintly. "You matter because you did not plan it." She reached for him then, not tentatively, not cautiously, openly. Her hand slid into his, fingers warm against his skin, and this time there was no question, no calculation behind the touch. "I will stay," she said simply. Not as a promise extracted, not as a sacrifice made, as a choice. Elias tightened his grip just enough to answer without words. Above them the stars burned indifferent and vast. Somewhere among them, councils would argue, probabilities would be recalculated, and strategies would be rewritten to account for a variable that refused to behave as expected. A former sovereign who would not kneel, a human who would not demand, and a quiet place that had become something far more dangerous than a throne, a home chosen freely. The perimeter field hummed, the forest breathed, and in the space between what had been lost and what might one day return, two people stood, no longer hiding, no longer alone, waiting not for the galaxy's permission, but for whatever future they would decide to meet together, not because the universe had changed, but because they had. The consequences did not arrive as violence. They arrived as absence. No ships in the sky, no messages in the air, no emissaries returning with ultimatums. The galaxy did what it often did when certainty failed. It waited, watched, withdrew just far enough to make the silence meaningful. Elias felt it in the days that followed. Supply routes adjusted, data relays lagged, requests for maintenance contracts quietly disappeared from his console. Nothing overt, nothing that could be protested, just enough pressure to test resolve. "They are isolating us," Elias said one evening as he reviewed the logs, softly. Asarai nodded. "It is a familiar tactic." "You seem calm about it." "I am familiar with loneliness imposed from the outside," she replied. "This is different." "How so?" She considered the question, eyes drifting to the window where the forest caught the last light of day. "Before," she said, "I was alone among many, watched, evaluated, needed." She turned back to him. "Now I am with one, chosen, that alters the equation." He closed the console and leaned back in his chair. "You're not a burden, if that's what you're worried about." Her gaze sharpened, not offended but intent. "I know," she said, "that is what makes this dangerous." He frowned. "Dangerous how?" "Because attachment," she said quietly, "creates leverage." The word landed hard. Elia stood and crossed the room, stopping a careful distance from her. If you're saying you should leave. I am saying, she interrupted gently, that staying will cost you more than solitude. He met her eyes. I didn't choose solitude. I chose quiet. There's a difference. She searched his face, gold eyes flickering with something close to fear, not of him but of believing him. You do not owe me defiance, she said. I know. But you do not owe me shelter. I know. You do not owe me loyalty. He hesitated then, just for a heartbeat. No, he said softly, that part I give. The admission hung between them, fragile and irreversible. Asarai inhaled slowly, steadying herself. In my world, she said, such a declaration would bind you, publicly, permanently. This isn't your world, Elias replied. No, she agreed. It is smaller, quieter. Her voice softened, which makes it harder to walk away from. She stepped closer, not to claim, not to test, to stand. I will not ask you to sacrifice yourself for me, she said. I have ruled enough lives, I will not take yours. But Elias looked at her, at the woman who had once commanded systems, who now weighed each word as if it mattered because it did. You're not taking it, he said. I'm offering it, on my terms. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, something had resolved. Then understand this, Asarai said. If I stay as myself, not as a sovereign, not as a symbol, and not as something to be hidden. I wouldn't ask for anything else. Good, she said, because if they come again, openly this time, I will not be silent. Elias smiled faintly. I'd be disappointed if you were. They stood there as night settled, the house humming softly around them. The space between them felt different now, not a careful distance, but a shared line neither pretended not to see. After a long moment, Asarai reached out. She did not take his hand. She rested her fingers against his wrist, where his pulse beat steady and human. Thank you, she said, not formally, not ceremonially, for seeing me when I was trying very hard not to exist. He covered her hand with his, warm and sure. You were always there, you just needed time. Her lips curved, a small, genuine smile. Yes, she said, I did. Above them, far beyond the forest canopy and the quiet land they had chosen, unseen forces recalculated once more. Not because a sovereign had returned, but because a woman had refused to disappear, and a human had chosen not to step aside. They arrived without ceremony. No thunder, no warning sirens, no dramatic descent through the clouds. One moment the clearing beyond the forest was empty, and the next it was occupied, 3 figures standing precisely at the edge of Elias' land, just beyond the perimeter field. They wore no armor, no visible weapons, only long dark garments that shifted subtly as if responding to forces Elias could not perceive. Asarai did not move. She stood beside Elias on the porch, hands relaxed at her sides, spine straight. Not in defiance, in refusal. They honor boundaries, she said quietly, at least on the surface. Elias folded his arms. Nice of them. But the center figure stepped forward, just enough to signal intent, not intrusion. Its voice carried without amplification, resonant and precise. Asarai of the Veiled conquered, it said. Former sovereign, your presence has been requested. Requested, Asarai repeated, not required. A pause, subtle recalculation. You remain under dormant designation, the figure replied. Your autonomy is provisional. And yet, Asarai said calmly, I stand unrestrained, on land that is not yours. The figure turned its head, slightly, almost imperceptibly, toward Elias. This human has altered your trajectory, it observed. Explain. Elias felt the weight of that gaze-like pressure against his skull. Not pain, assessment, Asarai answered before he could. He did nothing, she said. That is the point. Silence followed, dense, evaluative. You were removed for instability, the figure said. Your judgment was compromised. Yes, Asarai replied. By grief, by captivity, by isolation imposed in the name of efficiency. And now, the figure asked. Asarai inhaled, now she chose. Now, she said, I do not rule. A faint disturbance rippled through the air. "You abandon authority," the figure stated. "No," she corrected, "I relinquish it." Elias turned to look at her then fully. She met his gaze, not seeking permission, not reassurance, only witness. "I will not return to a throne built on obedience extracted from fear," Asarai continued. "I will not resume command under observation protocols that treat sentience as a variable to be managed." "That choice destabilizes multiple systems," the figure said. "Yes," she agreed, "it should." The second figure spoke for the first time. "You align yourself with this human." Asarai's answer was immediate. "I align myself with choice." Elias felt something tighten in his chest. He stepped forward, not crossing the boundary but close enough that the intent was unmistakable. "She stays," he said evenly. "And if that's a problem, you can leave." The figures turned fully toward him now. "You do not comprehend the consequences," the first said. Elias shrugged. "I'm an engineer. I deal with systems breaking all the time, usually because someone ignored the human element." Asarai's lips curved just slightly. The figures were silent for a long moment. Then, "Your designation will be updated," the first said. "Both of you." The air shimmered. Data exchanged. Decisions deferred rather than resolved. "This is not over," the second figure said. "No," Asarai agreed. "It is simply no longer yours to control." The visitors withdrew, not in defeat, not in victory, but in uncertainty. The clearing returned to stillness. For several seconds neither Elias nor Asarai spoke. Then Elias exhaled. "Well, that went better than expected." Asarai turned to him, gold eyes searching his face. "You did not have to speak," she said. "I know," he replied. "I wanted to." She studied him, something deep and unreadable shifting behind her expression. "You have made yourself visible," she said quietly. "So have you," he answered. A long pause, then she nodded once. "Yes," she said, "I have." The forest breathed around them. Ordinary sounds returned. Wind, distant life. But the quiet was different now, chosen, shared, and no longer unnoticed. The message arrived at dawn. Not through Elias' console, not through any channel he recognized. It appeared instead as a distortion in the air above the clearing, light bending into a sigil that made his vision blur if he stared too long. It was old technology, ritualized, symbolic, designed to be unmistakable. She was already standing outside when he stepped onto the porch. Her posture was different, not guarded, not withdrawn, centered. "They have named me," she said quietly. Elias joined her, the cool morning air brushing his skin. "I figured they would." She turned to face him, gold eyes steady, unflinching. "My name is Asarai." The word carried weight. Not just identity, but history spoken as declaration, not confession. "I was sovereign of the veiled conquered," she continued. "High arbiter of 7 systems. My authority was bound to balance, not conquest." Elias let that sink in. "And now I am declared dormant," she said. "Unfit to rule, too altered by captivity, too humanized." He snorted softly. "That's rich." Her lips curved faintly. "They fear contamination." "From me?" he asked. She shook her head once. "From you." The sigil in the air pulsed. Elias felt it then, a pressure behind his eyes, a subtle sensation like being evaluated by something vast and impersonal. Not hostile, curious. "They are marking variables," Asarai said. "Anomalies, factors that disrupt prediction." "And I'm one of them now," Elias muttered. "Yes." He looked at her. "Do I get a say in that?" Her gaze softened. "You already took it." The sigil shifted, resolving into clearer meaning, an invitation wrapped in threat. "They request your presence," Asarai translated silently. "Not here, not yet, but soon." Elias exhaled slowly. "Let me guess. They want to see what kind of human causes a fallen sovereign to speak like that." "They want to see why I choose to remain," she said. "Remain," he repeated. "Not hide." "Not hide," she agreed. The sigil dissolved, light scattering like mist burned away by the rising sun. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Elias said, "If you leave, will you come back?" It wasn't a demand, not even a plea, just a truth laid bare. Asarai studied him, not as a subject, not as a protector, but as an equal. As someone who had never tried to own her, never tried to fix her, and yet had quietly become the axis around which her sense of self had begun to realign. "I do not know," she said honestly. "The galaxy I left behind is not unchanged, and neither am I." He nodded, fair. She stepped closer, not touching, but close enough that he could feel the warmth she carried, subtle but undeniable. "But this," she continued softly, gesturing to the land, the house, the quiet they had built. "This was chosen every day. That matters." "It does," he said, "to me." Her fingers brushed his hand, accidental in appearance only. The contact sent a quiet current through him, not electric but grounding, like something settling into place. "When I speak to them again," she said, "I will not kneel." "Did you ever?" Elias asked. "Once," she replied, "long ago. I will not repeat the mistake." He smiled then, not wide, not carefree, but real. "Good." The forest stirred as the day fully arrived. Birds called. Systems hummed. Life, stubborn and ordinary, continued. And somewhere far beyond the sky above Karin 9, councils recalculated probabilities that no longer held. A former sovereign had chosen stillness over domination. A human who wanted nothing had become something the galaxy could not ignore. And neither of them yet knew what would be demanded when the universe finally came knocking in person. The alert did not fade. It pulsed steadily on the console, a soft amber glow that meant passive observation rather than immediate threat. Elias stared at it longer than was strictly necessary, as if the numbers might rearrange themselves into something less inconvenient. "They're not landing," he said finally, "just watching." "That is worse," she replied. He glanced at her. "You sound certain." "I am," she said. "Observation precedes judgment." "Judgment of what?" Her answer was immediate. "Me." Elias rubbed a hand over his face. "Figures. First quiet I've had in years, and the universe notices." She almost smiled at that. Almost. He moved through the house with practiced efficiency, sealing non-essential systems, routing external feeds through redundant filters. Not hiding. He knew better than to try, but not inviting scrutiny either. The kind of preparation you made when you didn't know the rules of the game, only that someone else had written them. She watched him work. Not from the shadows this time, from the center of the room. "You do not panic," she observed. "Panicking wastes energy," he replied. "I prefer being tired later." Her head tilted. "That is not how most react when they are found." "Most people don't get forcibly assigned alien royalty as a housemate," he said dryly. That earned him a real smile. Brief. Gone almost before he could register it. The external sensors chimed softly. Elias froze. "Message." He asked. "No," she said. Her voice had changed, lower, steadier. "A probe." The forest beyond the perimeter shimmered faintly, light bending in a way that made his eyes ache if he focused too hard. Whatever was out there was advanced. Deliberately subtle. "Can they see inside?" he asked. "Yes." "Can they hear us?" "No." "Good," Elias muttered. He straightened, squaring his shoulders. "Then they can watch this." He stepped closer to her, not touching, but unmistakably aligning himself at her side. Her eyes flicked to him, gold sharpening. "You place yourself forward," she said quietly. "That will mark you." "Already marked," he replied. "Anyone who dumps a former ruler on my doorstep and expects neutrality doesn't understand how humans work." "That is reckless," she said. "Probably," he agreed, "but it's a choice." Something shifted in her posture then. Not fear, not relief, recognition. She inhaled slowly and lifted her chin. The air changed. Elias felt it, not pressure, not sound, but a subtle reordering of space. Like standing too close to a powerful engine and suddenly realizing it was active all along. Her presence expanded, not physically, conceptually. Outside, the shimmer in the forest stuttered. The probe hesitated. She spoke, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a cadence that made the hairs on Elias' arms rise. "I am not lost," she said. "I am not broken, and I am not yours." The words were not meant for human ears. The shimmer collapsed inward, light folding like a held breath released too fast. Silence followed. The alert on the console dimmed, then vanished. Elias let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Well," he said, "that's one way to say hello." She swayed just slightly. He was at her side instantly, steadying without gripping. "Easy." Her fingers curled into the fabric of his sleeve, not in desperation, in grounding. "That took more than I intended," she admitted. "I have been contained for a long time." "You don't have to do that again," he said without hesitation. "Not for me." Her gaze lifted to his, searching not for permission but for expectation. Finding none, she relaxed into his support for a heartbeat longer than necessary. "They will return," she said softly. "Not openly, not yet." Let them," Elias replied. "This is still my land." She studied him. "You would defy an interstellar authority structure for quiet." "For choice," he corrected. "For yours and mine." That earned him something rarer than a smile. Respect. That night the house felt different. Charged. Aware. As Elias lay awake, listening to the steady hum of systems that suddenly felt very small compared to what had brushed past them, he understood something fundamental had changed. They were no longer unnoticed, and she was no longer hiding. In the darkness, her voice came softly from the other room. "Elias." "Yes." "If they demand my return, will you release me?" He didn't answer immediately. Then firmly, "I won't cage you ever." A pause. "That was not my question," she said gently. He stared at the ceiling, understanding dawning. "No," he said at last. "I won't make you stay, but I won't help them take you either." Silence followed. Then very quietly, "That is more than I expected." Outside, far beyond the forest, something ancient and patient recalculated. And for the first time, the galaxy noticed the quiet place Elias Ward had chosen to disappear into. Elias discovered that fear could be quiet. Not the sharp kind that made your hands shake or your heart race, but the slow, constant pressure of something unfinished. It lived in the pauses between her words now, in the way her gaze occasionally drifted past him, as if tracking shapes he could not see. She began helping, not because he asked. He never did. It started with small corrections. "You will burn the relay if you increase output that way," she said one afternoon, voice calm, almost distant. Elias paused, fingers hovering over the control panel. "I've done it this way for years." "Yes," she replied, "and the relay has been degrading for years." He glanced at the diagnostic readout. She was right. He didn't comment on it. Just adjusted the output and continued working. After that, she spoke more often. Not much, but enough that he began to anticipate it. Warnings, observations, quiet truths delivered without judgment. She never touched the machines, only listened. One evening he finally asked, "You hear things I don't you?" She tilted her head slightly. "Your kind prioritizes vision." "And yours?" "Pattern," she said. "Sound, stillness." That night, as the forest settled into nocturnal quiet, Elias found himself sitting across from her at the table. Not intentionally. It just happened. "You don't ask about before," she said. He shrugged. "Didn't think it was my place." Her fingers traced the edge of the table, slow and precise. "Others always asked. Wanted context, explanation, redemption. And you?" "I wanted distance," she said, "or obedience. Either was acceptable." He frowned. "From you." "No," she corrected gently. "From me." Something about that landed wrong in his chest. "Who decided that?" he asked, her eyes lifted, gold catching the low light. "I did," she said. "Once." The silence stretched, thick and deliberate. Then softly, "I ruled." The word sat between them, heavy as gravity. Elias exhaled. "Ruled what?" She did not answer immediately. "My people," she said at last, "for a long time." He nodded slowly, not shocked, just confirming something he'd felt since the beginning. "And now?" he asked. "Now I am considered unfit," she said without bitterness. "Trauma impairs authority. Vulnerability invites destabilization." "That's convenient," Elias muttered. Her lips curved faintly. Yes. The admission should have changed things, should have made him cautious, curious, afraid. Instead, he found himself saying, "You don't seem unfit to me." She studied him with unsettling intensity. "You are not a reliable metric." "I'll take that as a compliment." It was almost a joke, almost. That night Elias dreamed again. This time the hall was clearer. Vast pillars of black stone rose into shadow. Figures knelt, but they were not broken. They were waiting. At the center stood a woman with gold eyes and braided hair, spine straight, hands stained with blood and light. When he woke, his hands were trembling. Outside, dawn crept across the clearing. She was already awake. "You dreamed," she said. He blinked. "How did you?" "You spoke," she replied, "in your sleep." "What did I say?" She hesitated. "My name," she said finally. He swallowed. "I don't know it." Her gaze softened just slightly. "Not the one they gave me." The weight of that pressed down on him. "Do you want me to know?" he asked. "Yes," she said, then corrected herself. "Soon." A sharp tone cut through the morning air, a proximity alert. Elias was on his feet instantly, moving toward the console. "That's not scheduled traffic." She stood as well, calm, composed, but something in her posture had changed. Straightened, centered, not frightened, ready. "Someone is watching," she said. "Who?" Elias asked. She met his eyes, gold burning brighter in the dim light. "My people," she said, "or those who replaced me." The alert pulsed again. Outside, something shifted in the forest. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Elias realized this quiet life might not be allowed to last. Elias learned quickly that silence could have weight. Not the awkward kind that demanded filling, but the dense, intentional kind, like fog pressing against the edges of a forest. She carried that silence with her, folding it neatly into corners, laying it between them like an unspoken rule. It wasn't emptiness. It was containment. She began to move more during the day, not wandering, never wandering. Her paths were deliberate, repeated. From the window to the doorway. From the doorway to the small work table near the back wall. She stood often where she could see him without being seen herself, her reflection sometimes faintly visible in the polished metal of his equipment casings. Elias pretended not to notice. Routine became their language. He rose before sunrise. She was already awake. He prepared food. She ate when he left the room. He worked the perimeter, repaired the aging atmospheric regulators, cursed at a stubborn sensor array that refused calibration. She listened. He discovered this accidentally. He was recalibrating the east side field emitter when he heard it, the softest shift of breath behind him. Not fear, not surprise, attention. "You hear that?" he muttered to the machine. "That clicking. That's not supposed to be there. Means the harmonics are off." The sound stopped. The clicking. Elias frowned, leaned closer, adjusted the panel again. The noise did not return. He straightened slowly. She was standing several meters away, head tilted slightly, those gold eyes unfocused but intent. Her ears. He tried not to stare at them. The elegant elongated curve rising through her dark braids had angled toward the machine. "You did something," he said before he could stop himself. She did not respond. He waited. Nothing. "Okay," he said quietly. "Guess I'll take the win." That night he noticed she had moved the chair. Only a few centimeters. Just enough to catch the last sliver of sunset through the window. Small things. Always small things. Weeks passed. Her presence became less ghostly, more structural. As if the house had been missing a support beam and he'd only just realized how much quieter everything felt once it was there. She still spoke rarely, single words, short confirmations, but when she did it mattered. Yes. No. Later. Once when a storm rolled in faster than predicted and the lights flickered, he heard her inhale sharply. Not a scream. Not panic. Control breaking. He shut the generator down manually and let the house fall into dim emergency glow. He sat on the floor near the power unit, back against the wall, deliberately non-threatening. "It'll pass," he said, not to her but not to her either. These storms always do. She did not approach, but she did not retreat. After a long moment she sat as well, several steps away, back straight, hands folded too neatly in her lap. Her breathing slowed in increments precise as a countdown. "You regulate yourself," she said suddenly. Elias blinked. "What?" "Your voice," she clarified. "When systems fail, you regulate." He huffed a quiet laugh. "Habit. Keeps me from breaking things worse." Her gaze sharpened. "You do not escalate," she said. "You compensate." Something about the way she said it, like a classification, not a compliment, sent a faint chill up his spine. "That used to be my job," he replied after a moment. She considered that. He could almost hear the gears turning behind her eyes. That night, after he'd gone to bed, Elias dreamed of standing in a vast hall made of dark stone and light. Figures knelt around him, not to him but around something just out of view. When he woke, heart pounding, he dismissed it as stress. But when he stepped into the kitchen, she was there, hands resting on the table, waiting. "I was not always," she paused, searching. "This." He leaned against the counter, careful not to crowd her. "You don't have to explain." "I want to," she said. The words were steady, but her fingers curled slightly inward. "Before my stillness was chosen." That stopped him. Chosen how? She met his eyes fully now. No avoidance, no flinch. "Discipline," she said. "Authority." The air felt heavier. "You were important," Elias said carefully. Her lips pressed together in something that might have been a smile, or mourning. "Yes." Silence settled again, but it was different now. Less fog, more gravity. He nodded once. "Well, you're safe here, whatever you were, whatever you are." Her gold eyes searched his face, not for deception but for expectation. Finding none seemed to unsettle her more than hostility ever could. "Elias," she said. It was the first time she'd spoken his name. He felt it like a small fracture inside his chest. "Yes." She hesitated, then asked softly, "If I become more than this, will you require something in return?" The question landed between them like a blade, laid gently on a table. He answered without thinking, "No." Her shoulders lowered by a fraction. Outside, the storm passed. Inside, something else began. The first thing Elias Ward noticed was how still she was. Not the kind of stillness that came from discipline or training, but the kind born from expectation. The expectation that movement invited punishment, that drawing attention was dangerous. She stood exactly where the transport officers had left her, hands folded loosely in front of her, spine straight but not proud. As if her body remembered how to stand properly long after her mind had stopped caring whether it mattered. The dust of Karin 9 drifted lazily across the clearing, pale ochre against the muted greens of the surrounding forest. Elias had chosen this place precisely because nothing ever happened here. No trade routes, no political interest, no reason for anyone important to visit, and yet here they were. "She'll stay here," the officer said, voice clipped, already half turned back toward the transport. "Your designation was flagged as compatible. Single occupancy habitat. Stable income, no dependents." Elias didn't answer immediately. His eyes were on her. Her skin was an unnatural pale gray, smooth and matte like polished stone left too long in moonlight. Her hair was braided tightly against her scalp, dark cords pulled back with ceremonial precision that felt deeply out of place on a frontier world. And her eyes, gold, not reflective, not glowing, just aware, too aware, watching everything without ever quite meeting his gaze. "I didn't apply for this," Elias said finally. The officer sighed, the sound carrying the fatigue of someone who had stopped believing in consent weeks ago. "No one did. She's classified as non-hostile, non-violent, and non-functional under standard integration metrics." Non-functional. Elias felt something sour settle in his stomach. "She requires shelter, nutritional consistency, and minimal environmental stressors," the officer continued, tapping at her wrist console. "You are not expected to rehabilitate her, or interact with her beyond basic coexistence." The woman's fingers twitched once at the word interact, just once, then still again. "And if I refuse?" Elias asked. The officer met his eyes then, really looked at him. "Then she goes back into holding." Elias had seen holding facilities. Windowless, quiet in all the wrong ways. Places designed to keep people alive, not human. He exhaled slowly. "Fine," he said. "She can stay." The handover took less than 5 minutes. A data slate, a small pack of belongings. No goodbye, no reassurance offered to her. Then the transport lifted, scattering dust and sound, and Elias Ward was alone with an alien woman who had not spoken a single word. The silence stretched. He cleared his throat. "You can come inside if you want." She did not move. Right, of course not. He turned and walked toward the house instead, deliberately slow, deliberately predictable. He left the door open behind him. Minutes passed. Then, soft as falling ash, footsteps. She entered without sound, stopping just inside the threshold as if unsure the space truly belonged to her. Elias busied himself with the kitchen unit, pretending not to notice how her eyes tracked everything. The corners, the exits, the distance between objects. "You can use the room at the end of the hall," he said. "It's empty." No response. That night, Elias lay awake listening to the forest and the low hum of the perimeter field.